Hello there everyone, welcome to Shadowman Stories. I am your storyteller and I'm here to guide you tonight. I know many of you use these videos to drift off to sleep, so before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe to our channel. I'm always curious, where are you watching from and what time is it in your part of the world? Now, find your cozy spot and relax. My name is Joseph Running Bear, and what I'm about to tell you goes against everything my people believe about speaking of these things. But people are dying, and silence serves only evil now. I'm 33 years old, been a park ranger at Canyonlands for 10 years. My mother was Navajo, my father was white. I grew up on the reservation with my grandmother, learning the old ways, speaking Dine at home and English at school. When I joined the Park Service, I thought I was building bridges between two worlds. I never thought those worlds would collide, in blood and terror. It was August 1979, hotter than hell in the Utah desert. The university team had been at the site for 3 weeks, digging up what they called an important Anasazi burial ground. Important to who? That's what I kept asking myself every time I drove past their camp. The team leader was Dr. Richard Pemberton, a thin man with thick glasses, who talked fast and never seemed to listen. He had permits, paperwork, all the right stamps from Washington, but he didn't have permission from the people who mattered most, the ones whose ancestors were buried there. It's science, Joe, he told me, when I brought up the tribal concerns. We're expanding human knowledge. These artifacts belong in museums, not rotting in the ground. I wanted to explain that for my people. Disturbing the dead isn't just disrespectful, it's dangerous. But men like Pemberton don't believe in anything they can't measure with their tools. Thomas Beggy, one of the elders from the Navajo Nation, drove out to see me that first week. He was maybe 70 years old, with silver hair braided down his back and eyes that had seen too much. "That place is not good, grandson," he told me in Navajo. We sat on my porch, drinking coffee as the sun set behind the red rocks. Bad things happened there, long ago, the earth remembers. What kind of bad things? Thomas was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said, "Some people, they break the sacred laws. They do things that normal people won't do. They eat what should not be eaten. They wear what should not be worn. And when they die, they don't stay dead the right way." A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. I knew he was talking about witches, the kind we're not supposed to name out loud. "Is that why the site feels wrong?" I asked. "You feel it too?" I nodded. Every time I went near the dig site, my skin crawled. The horses wouldn't go within 100 yards of it. Even the birds seemed to avoid flying overhead. "My grandmother made me promise never to speak of such things," I said. Thomas reached over and put his weathered hand on my shoulder. "Sometimes promises must be broken to prevent greater harm. Watch yourself, grandson. Watch the diggers. And if things go bad," he pressed a small leather pouch into my hand. "White ash and corn pollen. Bless the old way." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what Thomas had said, about the wrongness I felt near the burial site. Around 2 a.m., I got up and drove out toward the dig. The archaeological camp was quiet, just for tents and a equipment trailer clustered around the excavation. Security lights cast harsh shadows on the red sand. Everything looked normal, but something felt off. That's when I noticed the tracks. They started at the edge of camp wolf prints, clear as day in the soft sand. But as I followed them with my flashlight, they changed. The paw prints gradually became smaller, more like a coyote, then smaller still, almost like a dog. And then they became human footprints. I stood there staring at the tracks, my heart pounding. In 10 years of ranger work, I'd seen plenty of weird things. Flash floods, rock slides, tourists doing stupid stunts. But I'd never seen anything like this. The tracks led right up to Dr. Pemberton's tent. I radioed dispatch at dawn, keeping my voice steady. "Unit 7 to base. Need to report a fatality at the archaeological site." "Copy that. Unit 7. What's the nature of the incident?" I looked down at what was left of Dr. Pemberton and tried to find words. "Animal attack. Multiple animals. By the look of it. Better send the coroner and maybe call the state police." Pemberton was dead. No question about that. But the way he died, I'd seen bear attacks, mountain lion kills, even a few cases where packs of coyotes had gone after livestock. This was different. The tent wasn't damaged. No tears, no signs of a struggle. Pemberton's body was laid out neat as you please in the center. arms crossed over his chest like someone had arranged him for a funeral, but he'd been torn apart. The wounds were all wrong. Bite marks from different animals. I could see wolf teeth, coyote fangs, bear claws, and something else. Something that looked almost human. Lisa Chen, one of the graduate students, was the first to wake up. She took one look at Pemberton's tent and started screaming. The sound cut through the morning air like a knife. What happened? She kept asking, what happened to Dr. Pemberton? I didn't have an answer. How do you explain tracks that change from animal to human? How do you tell someone that their professor was killed by something that shouldn't exist? The state police showed up around noon. Detective Sarah Martinez was a tough woman with sharp eyes who'd worked plenty of outdoor crime scenes. She looked at the body, looked at the tracks, and asked the same questions I'd been asking myself. Any of you hear anything last night? She asked the team. They all shook their heads. Lisa Chen looked pale and shaky. I'm a light sleeper, she said. I would have heard if there was a fight, or anything. What about you, Ranger? Martinez asked me. You patrol out here at night. Sometimes I drove by around 2 a.m. Everything looked quiet. That was true, as far as it went. I didn't mention the tracks. Somehow, I knew she wouldn't believe me. The coroner took the body away, and Martinez spent the afternoon taking pictures and measurements. The university decided to keep the dig going, but half the team packed up and left that same day. Can't say I blamed them. That left Lisa Chen, a photographer named Mike Santos, and Frank Morrison, the security guard they'd hired to watch the equipment at night. Frank was a local guy, mid-50s, who'd done security work at mines and construction sites. He had a trailer parked at the edge of camp and was supposed to keep an eye on things. You okay staying out here? I asked him that evening. Frank shrugged. It's just an animal attack, right? Probably a rabid coyote or something. I got my rifle, and I'm not sleeping in a tent like the professor was. I wanted to tell him about the tracks, about the wrongness I felt in this place. But what could I say? That I thought something supernatural had killed Pemberton. He'd think I was crazy. 2 days later, it happened again. This time, it was Lisa Chen. Mike Santos found her body in the morning, about 50 yards from camp. She'd been torn apart just like Pemberton, but there were differences that made my blood run cold. Her research notes were burned, every single page reduced to ash, scattered by the wind. But her personal stuff, her wallet and jewelry and clothes, were all arranged in a neat pile nearby, untouched. Whatever killed her had been selective, purposeful, and the tracks, God, the tracks were everywhere. Wolf prints, coyote prints, human footprints, all mixed together in patterns that hurt to look at. Some of the human prints were barefoot, others showed boots, the same kind Lisa had been wearing. This is wrong, Mike Santos said. He was a thin kid with nervous hands who kept taking pictures of everything. This is really, really wrong. I had to agree with him. This wasn't random predation. Something was hunting the people who'd disturbed that burial ground. Something that could think and plan and choose its victims. Frank Morrison was spooked now too. I saw lights last night, he told me. Weird lights moving around the dig site, and I heard voices. What kind of voices? That's the thing. I thought I heard Dr. Pemberton calling for help, but Doc Pemberton's been dead for 3 days. A chill ran down my spine. Thomas Big warnings echoed in my mind. Frank, I need you to listen to me very carefully, I said. Don't go toward any voices you hear at night. Don't matter if you think you recognize them. And don't go near the burial site after dark. Why? What do you think is out there? I touched the pouch of white ash and corn pollen in my pocket, something that should have stayed buried. By the end of the week, only Frank Morrison was left. At the site, Mike Santos had packed up his cameras and driven back to Salt Lake City without even saying goodbye. The university had officially suspended the dig pending investigation of safety concerns, but Frank stayed. Said he needed the money, and besides, what were the chances of another animal attack? I tried to convince him to leave, drove out there, every day, sometimes twice a day, checking on him. He seemed okay during daylight hours, but when the sun went down, he got jumpy. It's the sounds, he told me on the 4th night, like someone walking around the perimeter of camp, just outside the range of the security lights. You see anything? Shadows, movement. Last night, I could have sworn I saw Dr. Pemberton standing at the edge of the dig site, just standing there watching me. I felt sick. Frank, you need to get out of here tonight. But Frank was stubborn. I'm not going to be scared off by shadows and weird noises. Besides, if there really is something out there, shouldn't someone keep an eye on it? That night, I decided to stay close. I parked my truck about a quarter-mile away and hiked back to watch the camp from a ridge overlooking the site. I had my binoculars, my radio, and the pouch Thomas Begay had given me. Around midnight, I saw them, figures moving around the camp. At first, I thought it was just Frank, making his rounds, but there were too many of them, and they moved wrong, too fluid, too quick, like they were floating just above the ground. I focused my binoculars and nearly dropped them. One of the figures looked exactly like Dr. Pemberton. Same thin build, same thick glasses, same nervous way of walking. But Pemberton had been dead for a week. Another figure was Lisa Chen. I could see her face clearly in the moonlight, could recognize her long black hair and the red jacket she'd been wearing when she died. They were circling Frank's trailer like wolves around a campfire. I grabbed my radio. Frank, this is Joe. You need to get out of there right now. Static answered me. Frank, do you copy? More static. Then, through the crackling, I heard Frank's voice. Joe, thank God. Something's wrong out here. Dr. Pemberton just knocked on my door. He says he needs help with something at the dig site. Frank, don't open that door. Pemberton's dead. You know he's dead, but it's really him. Joe, he's got all his equipment, his clipboard, everything. Says there was a mistake. Says he was just injured and needs help getting back to town. Frank, listen to me. Do not open that door. Whatever's out there, it's not human. The radio went quiet for a long moment. Then Frank's voice came back, but it sounded different. Shaky. Joe, ... There's something else. Lisa's here too, and she's moving wrong. Like her joints don't work right. Through my binoculars, I could see the figures closing in on the trailer. More of them now, shapes I didn't recognize, wearing animal skins, moving on all fours one moment and walking upright the next. I'm coming down there, I said. No. Frank's voice was sharp with panic. Don't come down here. There's something wrong with this whole place. The ground, ... The ground feels wrong under my feet, like it's moving. I watched in horror as one of the figures, the one that looked like Pemberton, reached the trailer door. It knocked gently, politely, just like a professor would knock. Then I heard Frank scream. The radio went dead. I ran down that ridge faster than I'd ever moved in my life, but by the time I reached the camp, everything was quiet. Frank's trailer was dark. The security lights were still on, but they seemed dimmer somehow, like the bulbs were dying. I found Frank's body inside the trailer. Like the others, he'd been torn apart, but this time there was something different, something that made me sick to my stomach. He was wearing an animal skin, a wolf pelt draped over his shoulders like a cape. His face was frozen in an expression of terror, but his eyes reflected the light like an animal's. Whatever had killed the others had tried to turn Frank into one of them. I backed out of the trailer and nearly ran into Thomas Begay. Grandfather, I said in Navajo. How did you? I felt it, he said quietly. The evil is spreading, getting stronger. What are they? Witches who broke the sacred laws long ago. They were buried here to keep them trapped. But the digging, the disturbing of their rest, ... It woke them up. As if summoned by his words, shapes began emerging from the darkness around us. Dr. Pemberton, Lisa Chen, and now Frank Morrison, all walking toward us with that wrong, fluid movement. But they looked perfect. Exactly like the dead people, down to the smallest detail. If I hadn't seen their bodies, I would have believed they were real. They want you to join them, Thomas said. They need living people to complete their transformation, to come back fully into this world. The thing that looked like Pemberton spoke. Joe, thank goodness you're here. We've been trying to figure out what happened to us. Something attacked us, something terrible. We need your help. Its voice was perfect, exactly like the real Pemberton, down to his nervous laugh and the way he said my name. Don't listen, Thomas whispered. Don't let them trick you. But the fake Lisa Chen was talking now to Joe. Please, we're hurt. We need to get to a hospital. That security guard, Frank, he went crazy. He put on some kind of animal skin and attacked us. We barely got away. They were so convincing. If I hadn't seen their bodies, if I didn't have Thomas beside me, I might have believed them. That's when I understood how truly dangerous these things were. They didn't just look like their victims. They had their memories, their personalities, their knowledge. They were perfect copies, except for one thing: they were evil. There's only one way to stop them, Thomas said quietly, but it's dangerous, and it might cost us both our lives. The fake people kept talking, kept trying to convince me they were real, but I could see the wrongness now. The way their shadows fell at impossible angles, the way their eyes reflected, light like animal eyes, the way they never quite seemed to touch the ground when they walked. What do we have to do? I asked. Find their real bodies, the original witches. They're using the power of this place to animate these copies, but their true forms are still here somewhere, hidden. How do we find them? Follow the smell of death, follow the wrongness. It'll lead us to where they're really buried. The thing that looked like Frank Morrison stepped closer. It was wearing the wolf pelt, and in the moonlight I could see that the skin was moving slightly, like it was breathing. Joe, it said in Frank's voice, I know this is confusing, but you have to trust us. Something evil is in this place. Something that's been pretending to be us. We need your help to stop it. For a moment, I almost believed it. The voice was so perfectly Frank's, full of the same stubborn courage that had made him stay at the camp in the first place. Then I noticed its feet, where Frank Morrison had worn work boots. This thing was wearing wolf paws. The transformation wasn't complete yet. They're getting stronger, Thomas said. The longer they're active, the more real they become. Soon, we won't be able to tell the difference at all. I pulled out the pouch he'd given me and scattered some of the white ash in a circle around us. The fake people immediately stepped back, hissing like angry cats. That'll hold them for a while, Thomas said. But not long. We need to move. We headed toward the burial site, following a path of wrongness that seemed to pull at my soul. The air got thicker the closer we got, and I could taste something metallic and rotten on my tongue. The dig site was maybe 50 yards across, with neat archaeological grids marked out in string. But something was different. Where the university team had been carefully excavating, new holes had appeared, deeper holes, dug from underneath. They dug themselves out, Thomas said. When the archaeologists disturbed the sacred bindings, it gave the witches enough power to break free. At the center of the site was a hole I hadn't seen before, maybe 6 feet across, and God knows how deep. The smell coming out of it was indescribable, like rotting meat mixed with something chemical and wrong. Down there, Thomas said, that's where their real bodies are. I peered into the hole with my flashlight. At the bottom, maybe 20 feet down, I could see shapes moving, human-like, but covered in animal skins, crawling around each other like maggots. How do we stop them? White ash arrows, bless the traditional way, but someone has to go down there and do it up close. The witches are too powerful now for anything else to work. I looked at the old man. Thomas, you can't. I'm too old to climb down there. It has to be you, grandson. The fake people had found us again. They stood at the edge of the burial site, just outside the range of the white ashides scattered. More of them now, I counted. At least a dozen figures, all wearing the faces of people who'd been killed or gone missing over the years. Joe, the fake Pemberton called. We know what you're thinking. But those things down in that hole, they're not the real threat. The real threat is the old man you're with. He's the one who's been killing people. He's trying to trick you. For a split second, doubt crept into my mind. What if Thomas was the real enemy? What if I'd been manipulated this whole time? Then I looked at Thomas's shadow in the moonlight. It fell straight and true, exactly where it should. I looked at the fake people's shadows. They twisted and writhed like living things, never quite matching their bodies. Nice try, I said. Thomas handed me a small bundle of arrows, each one tipped with white ash that gleamed like bone in the moonlight. Aim for the heart, he said, and whatever you do, don't let them touch you. If they get their hands on you, they can start the transformation, turn you into one of them. I tied a rope around my waist and started down into the hole. The smell got worse with every foot I descended, until I was gagging and fighting not to throw up. At the bottom, I found them. 3 withered human forms, so old and dried out, they looked like mummies. But they were moving, crawling round each other, in slow circles. They wore animal pelts, wolf, coyote, and bear, that seemed to be fused to their skin. When they sensed me, they looked up with eyes that glowed red in the darkness. Yatia, I raised my bow and aimed at the first witch's heart. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely hold the arrow steady. You know what we offer, another witch said. Power. Immortality, the ability to become anything you want. All you have to do is eat from the flesh of your own kind. The third witch held up what looked like a piece of jerky. We've been saving this for you. It's from your friend Frank. Very fresh. My stomach lurched, but I kept the arrow aimed. Go back to hell where you belong. I let the first arrow fly. It struck the lead witch square in the chest, and the creature exploded into ash with a shriek that echoed up from the depths of the earth. The other two witches rushed at me, moving faster than anything that old and dried out should have been. Able to move, I got the second arrow off, just as claws raked across my shoulder, tearing through my uniform shirt. The second which crumbled to dust. The third which tackled me to the ground. Its face was inches from mine, and I could smell its breath like rotting meat and old blood. Its hands were around my throat, squeezing. Join us, it whispered, or die like all the others. I managed to get my last arrow up between us and drive it into the witch's chest. The creature looked down at the white ash arrowhead with surprise, then smiled with teeth that were filed 2 points. Not enough, it said. Not strong enough. Then Thomas Begay's voice echoed down from above. HCH, Nahastal. HCH, Nahastal. It was the Beauty Way prayer, spoken in the old language with power behind it. The witch holding me screamed and burst into flames. I climbed out of that hole as fast as I could. At the top, Thomas was standing in a circle of corn pollen, chanting in Navajo. The fake people were gone when their creators died. The copies had simply faded away like morning mist. Is it over? I asked. For now, Thomas said, but this place will always be dangerous. The earth here has been poisoned by their evil. It will take generations to heal. That was 45 years ago. The official report said that Dr. Pemberton, Lisa Chen, and Frank Morrison were killed by a rabid pack of coyotes. The university never sent another expedition to that site. I put in for a transfer the next month, told my supervisor I needed a change of scenery. The truth was, I couldn't stay near that place. Even with the witches destroyed, I could feel the wrongness in the land every time I drove past. My family and I moved to the Navajo Nation, where I worked as a cultural liaison for the tribal council. I never spoke about what happened at Canyonlands, not to my wife, not to my children, not to anyone except Thomas Begay. Thomas lived for another 10 years. Before he died, he made me promise to watch that burial site, to make sure no one else ever tried to dig there again. I kept that promise. Every few months, I drive out to the old archaeological site. It's all grown over now, covered with sagebrush and prairie grass. The Park Service put up a sign declaring it culturally sensitive and off-limits to the public. But sometimes, on clear nights when the moon is full, I can still see lights moving around out there. Shapes that walk like people but cast no shadows. Voices calling from the darkness, trying to lure new victims. The evil isn't gone. It's sleeping, waiting for someone foolish enough to disturb it again. That's why I'm telling you this story, even though it breaks every promise I made to my grandmother. Even though speaking of these things is supposed to bring bad luck, because people need to know. Some graves should never be disturbed. Some knowledge is too dangerous to possess. And some things that die don't stay dead the way they're supposed to. Last month, a new university team submitted permits to excavate the Canyonlands site. They want to use modern archaeological techniques to properly document the cultural remains. They think they know better than the old warnings. They think science can protect them from things that were old when the world was young. I've written letters, made phone calls, tried to explain why that place should be left alone. But I can't tell them the real reason without sounding crazy. So I'll do what Thomas Begay did for me. I'll watch, I'll wait, and if those archaeologists ignore the warnings, if they start digging where they shouldn't dig, I still have some of that white ash, still remember the old prayers. Some promises are more important than others, and some nightmares never really end. My name is Douglas McPherson Doug. To the climbing community, and I've pulled more bodies off these peaks than I care to count. Avalanche victims mostly, some rockfall casualties, the occasional hypothermia case who pushed too hard in bad weather. I've been a ranger in North Cascades National Park since 1969, started as a seasonal trail maintenance grunt and worked my way up to technical rescue specialist, got my helicopter certification in '74, my swiftwater rescue rating in '76. I hold the state record for high-altitude rescues above 8,000 feet, not a record I'm proud of. Just a grim accounting of how many times I've had to risk my own neck to recover someone else's mistake. I'm 41 years old. Came here from the Highlands when I was 19 with nothing but a climbing background and a stubborn Scottish refusal to quit on anything. Lost my climbing partner Colin to an avalanche on Mount Baker in 73. Bastard triggered a slab slide that buried him under 12 feet of snow. We never even found his body. That's when I decided to dedicate my career to preventing mountain deaths, to making sure other climbers got to go home to their families. I've studied every mountain hazard known to science: rockfall patterns, avalanche zones, weather systems that can turn deadly in minutes. I can read snow conditions like a book, predict rockfall probability by the color of dawn light on granite faces. I know the difference between stable granite and loose volcanic rock by the sound my ice axe makes against it. Hell, I've written 2 technical manuals on alpine rescue techniques that are still used in training programs across the Pacific Northwest. But I never believed in flying monsters. July 1987 brought perfect climbing conditions to the North Cascades. Clear skies, stable weather, and snow conditions that had the technical climbing routes in prime shape. We saw record numbers of mountaineers, that season serious climbers tackling the challenging peaks like Mount Challenger, Forbidden Peak, El Dorado. These weren't weekend hikers getting in over their heads. These were experienced alpinists with decades of climbing between them. The first incident happened on July 12th. I got the radio call at 0630 from the Marble Mount Ranger Station, climbing team on Mount Challenger requesting emergency evacuation, reporting what the dispatcher described as a pterodactyl attack. I remember rolling my eyes and reaching for my coffee. Altitude-induced hallucinations weren't uncommon above 7,000 feet, especially when climbers pushed themselves too hard without proper The team leader was Brian Hutchins, a 15-year climbing veteran who'd summited Denali twice and had first ascents on technical routes throughout Alaska. Not the kind of guy prone to panic or altitude sickness. When I reached him by radio, his voice was steady but urgent. "Doug, we need immediate evacuation from the Challenger Glacier. My partner's downfell during the night." But this wasn't equipment failure or pilot error. Something grabbed him. Grabbed him how, Brian? Walk me through what happened. Static crackled for 10 seconds before he responded. "You're not going to believe this, but something flew into our camp around midnight. Big, dark shape against the stars. Made this sound like a screaming wind, but controlled. Intelligent. It grabbed Pete right out of his sleeping bag and carried him away." I've heard a lot of crisis-induced confusion over the years. Shock makes people remember things wrong, create explanations for traumatic events that their minds can't process. But Brian's description was too specific, too detailed. He gave me exact coordinates, described the creature's flight pattern, even estimated its wingspan at 12 to 15 feet. We found Brian's partner, Pete Morrison, 2 hours later. My helicopter pilot, Jenny Alvarez, spotted the body on the glacier 2,000 feet below their campsite. When we rappelled down to recover him, I saw something that made my mountain rescue training worthless. Pete had landed on relatively soft snow, but the impact pattern was all wrong. His body showed damage consistent with being dropped from extreme height, internal injuries, compression fractures, but there was no cliff face above where we found him. The nearest vertical drop was a quarter-mile away, and there's no way a falling climber could have traveled that distance horizontally. More disturbing were the marks on his shoulders. 4 parallel cuts through his climbing jacket, each about 2 inches long and spaced exactly 4 inches apart. They went deep enough to score the bone underneath. The spacing suggested talons from something with a 15-foot wingspan. As we loaded Pete's body into the helicopter, Jenny kept scanning the sky nervously. "You ever see anything like those marks before, Doug?" I had to admit I hadn't. In 18 years of mountain rescues, I'd seen what bears could do, what rockfall looked like, how avalanches destroyed human bodies, but I'd never seen talon marks that precise, that deliberate. Flying back to base, I stared down at the endless peaks stretching in all directions. The North Cascades contain some of the most remote wilderness in the lower 48 states, deep valleys that have never felt a human footprint, peaks that rise straight out of primordial forests. If something wanted to hide up here, something large and intelligent, it could remain undetected for decades. But flying monsters, that was impossible, wasn't it? The second attack happened 6 days later. Derek Thompson, solo climber attempting a new route on El Dorado Peak, missed his scheduled radio check-in. Thompson was methodical to a fault, former military, always followed safety protocols, never missed a communication window. When he failed to respond to 3 consecutive radio calls, I knew we had a problem. I took the helicopter up at first light, scanning the technical climbing routes on El Dorado's north face. Found his camp at 7,500 feet, but Derek was gone. His sleeping bag was shredded, blood soaked into the synthetic fill. The tent fabric showed the same 4-inch spacing of cuts we'd seen on Pete Morrison, but this time I found tracks. They started at the edge of Derek's campsite and extended 30 yards across a snowfield before disappearing entirely. Not human tracks, not bear tracks. Something bipedal but wrong 3 toes instead of 5, each ending in what looked like a large claw mark. The stride length was 7 feet, suggesting something with long, powerful legs. More unsettling was how the tracks ended. No gradual fade, no transition to rock where prints wouldn't show. They just stopped, as if whatever made them had taken flight, mid-stride. I photographed everything, collected measurements, bagged samples of the blood-soaked fabric. Back at headquarters, I spread the evidence across my desk and tried to make sense of what I was seeing. 2 experienced climbers, both attacked at night in their camps, both by something that could fly and had substantial talons. The rational part of my mind insisted there had to be a conventional explanation. Golden eagles had 8-foot wingspans and could be aggressive defending territory. Maybe a particularly large specimen, protecting a nesting area from human intrusion. But golden eagles don't carry off 180-pound men, and they sure as hell don't leave bipedal tracks. I was still analyzing the evidence when Dr. Sarah Kim called from the University of Washington. She'd heard about the incidents through the climbing community grapevine and offered to assist with the investigation. Sarah specialized in raptor behavior and had done extensive fieldwork with large predatory birds throughout Alaska and western Canada. Mind if I take a look at your evidence, Ranger McPherson? I've documented some unusual aggressive behavior in northern populations of Steller's sea eagles. It's possible we're dealing with an undocumented northern migration. Dr. Kim drove up from Seattle the next morning with a truck full of specialized equipment, telephoto cameras, audio recording gear, something called a thermal imaging scanner that could detect heat signatures from remarkable distances. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 30s, with the kind of intense focus that serious researchers develop when they're on to something significant. She studied my photographs for 2 hours without speaking, occasionally making notes in a worn-field journal. Finally, she looked up with an expression I couldn't read. "These aren't bird tracks, Doug. The gait pattern is all wrong. Too much weight on the forward portion of each toe," suggesting something that walks upright most of the time, but can transition to quadrupedal movement when needed. And the claw, MARKS, no North American bird species has talons this large. So what are we dealing with? I don't know, but I'd like to set up observation equipment at the attack sites. If something's hunting in this area, it probably has established patterns, routes, favored hunting grounds. We might be able to predict where it will strike next. That afternoon, we flew reconnaissance over both attack sites, Sarah studying the terrain through powerful binoculars while I handled the helicopter controls. She was particularly interested in the topography around each incident location, wind patterns, thermal updrafts, sightlines that would give a flying predator tactical advantages. "There," she said suddenly, pointing toward a near vertical cliff face on Mount Challenger. "Do you see that?" I followed her direction and felt my mouth go dry. About 300 feet up the cliff face, tucked into what should have been an impossible ledge, something had built a massive nest. It was at least 12 feet across, constructed from what looked like branches and other materials. "Can you get us closer?" Sarah asked. I maneuvered the helicopter to within 200 yards of the cliff face, close enough for Sarah's telephoto lens to document details. As the images developed, we saw that the nest wasn't built from natural materials alone. Woven throughout the structure were pieces of modern climbing equipment, carabiners, ice axes, and something that made my stomach clench. Fragments of brightly colored fabric that looked like torn sections of climbing jackets. "Jesus Christ," I whispered. Sarah lowered her camera, her face pale. "Doug, this suggests intelligence, tool use. Whatever built this nest collected human artifacts and incorporated them into the structure deliberately." As we hovered there, studying the impossible nest, I caught movement in my peripheral vision. Something large and dark detached itself from the cliff face about 50 feet above the nest. Something that shouldn't have been able to cling to vertical rock. It unfolded wings that spanned at least 12 feet and dropped into a controlled glide that brought it directly toward our helicopter. Holy shit. Jenny Alvarez yanked the collective, pulling us into a rapid climb, but the creature adjusted its flight path with supernatural agility. For 10 seconds, it paced us, staying just outside our rotor wash, studying us with intelligence that made my skin crawl. I got a clear look at its face through the helicopter's side window. Humanoid features, but wrong in every detail. Skull, prominent brow ridge, eyes that reflected light like a nocturnal predator's. When it opened its mouth, I saw fangs designed for tearing flesh. Then it screamed. The sound penetrated the helicopter's engine noise and went straight through my chest cavity. Not just loud penetrating, I felt my heart skip beats. My vision blur. Sarah cried out in pain, pressing her hands to her ears. Even Jenny, wearing noise-cancelling headphones, grimaced and fought to maintain control. The creature screamed again, and this time I heard rockfall starting on the slopes below us. The sound was triggering avalanche conditions, using acoustic energy as a weapon. "Get us out of here," I shouted. Jenny pushed the helicopter into a steep dive, using gravity and momentum to outrun whatever was pursuing us. When I looked back, the creature had disappeared, but I could still feel those reflected eyes, watching from somewhere in the vast wilderness below. Dr. Kim was shaking as we landed back at headquarters. That wasn't any known species. The cranial structure, the wing configuration, the acoustic capabilities, nothing in the fossil record or current taxonomy matches what we just encountered. I poured 3 cups of coffee with hands that wouldn't stop trembling. So what the hell do we do about it? Sarah stared out the window toward the peaks where something ancient and hungry was hunting modern climbers. We figure out how to kill it before it kills anyone else. The third attack came 5 days later, and this time we had witnesses. Marcus Steele was one of the most respected climbing guides in the Pacific Northwest, 23 years of experience, holder of multiple first ascents, the kind of guy who could read mountain conditions like poetry. He was leading a party of 4 clients up Forbidden Peak when it happened. I got the distress call at 05 for 5 hours. Mayday. Mayday. This is Steele Expedition on Forbidden Peak. We have a man down. Repeat. Man down. Request immediate evacuation. The voice on the radio belonged to Janet Morrison, one of Marcus's clients. Her transmission was broken by static and what sounded like sobbing, but I caught the key details. Marcus was dead, killed by something that had attacked their camp during the pre-dawn hours. Dr. Kim and I reached the site 90 minutes later. We found Marcus's body at the base of a 200-foot cliff, but the physics were impossible again. The climbing party had been camped on a broad ledge 400 feet above where we found him, with no direct line of fall to his final position. The 4 surviving clients were huddled together on the ledge, traumatized but coherent enough to give testimony. That would have sounded insane if I hadn't seen the creature myself. It came out of nowhere, Janet Morrison told us, her voice steady despite the shock. Something huge, with wings like a hang glider but alive, red eyes that seemed to glow in the dark. It dropped down on Marcus while he was checking the weather. Radio. Another client, a software engineer named David Park, provided more details. The thing was at least 8 feet tall when it stood upright, covered in dark fur or hair, but the wings were leathery like a bat's. When it grabbed Marcus, he didn't even have time to scream. But the most disturbing testimony came from the expedition's photographer, Lisa Chen, who had been documenting the climb with a professional camera. It wasn't just hunting, she said. It was studying us, watching how we moved, how we reacted. When Marcus tried to reach for his ice axe, the creature anticipated his movement and knocked the weapon away before grabbing him. Dr. Kim interviewed each witness separately while I examined the physical evidence. The creature had left clear tracks this time, dozens of them across the snowfield surrounding their campsite. The prints showed the same 3-toed bipedal pattern we'd documented before. But now I could see additional details. The impressions were deeper in the front, suggesting the creature's weight was carried on the balls of its feet, consistent with something designed for sudden forward acceleration. More troubling were the tactical implications of the attack. The creature had approached from the expedition's blind spot, using the terrain to mask its approach until the final moment. It had targeted the most experienced climber first, eliminating the greatest threat before the group could organize a defense. "This thing is learning," I told Sarah as we flew back to headquarters. "It's studying human behavior, adapting its hunting strategies based on what it observes. Sarah had been analyzing the audio recordings from our helicopter encounter, running the creature's vocalizations through specialized software. Doug, look at this frequency analysis. The creature's scream isn't just loud, it's precisely tuned to trigger sympathetic vibrations in granite and ice. It's using sound as a weapon to cause rockfall and avalanche. She showed me the computer readouts, pointing to specific frequency peaks. These subsonic elements would be undetectable to human hearing, but devastating to geological stability. One scream from this creature could bring down an entire mountainside. That evening, we spread topographical maps across my office desk and marked every known incident location. The pattern that emerged was unmistakable. All attacks had occurred within a 5-mile radius of the nest site we'd discovered on Mount Challenger. The creature was defending established territory, eliminating threats to its domain with systematic efficiency. It's hunting the most experienced climbers first, Sarah observed. Marcus Steele, Brian Hutchins, Derek Thompson, these weren't random tourists. They were skilled alpinists who could potentially threaten the creature or compete for resources in its territory. Over the next week, I began discreetly warning climbing guides about unusual rockfall conditions in the affected areas, trying to redirect climbing traffic away from the creature's hunting grounds without causing panic in the climbing community. But experienced mountaineers are drawn to challenging routes precisely because they're dangerous, and my vague warnings only seemed to increase interest in the area. The fourth attack happened during a solo reconnaissance mission I was conducting. With Dr. Kim, we'd set up observation equipment at 3 different locations, hoping to document the creature's movement patterns using thermal imaging cameras and motion sensors. We were camped below Pyramid Peak, monitoring the instruments, when Sarah's motion detector started beeping frantically. Through her thermal scope, she tracked a large heat signature moving across the mountainside at impossible speed, too fast for any known animal, following flight paths that defied aerodynamic principles. "It's coming this way," she whispered. I grabbed my radio to call for helicopter extraction, but before I could transmit, the creature's scream echoed across the valley. The sound was different this time, not the piercing shriek we'd heard before, but a lower, more complex vocalization that seemed to carry distinct tonal patterns. "It's communicating," Sarah breathed. "That's not just a hunting cry, it's a language." The thermal signature disappeared from her scope, but we could hear movement in the darkness around our position. Rocks skittering down slopes, branches breaking, the whisper of something large moving through the air above us. Then silence. We waited for 20 minutes before I risked using the radio. When the helicopter finally extracted us at dawn, we discovered why the creature had withdrawn. It had been hunting other prey. A climbing party of 3 experienced alpinists had been found dead on Pyramid Peak, their bodies arranged in a specific pattern facing the direction of the creature's nest. They weren't just killed, they were positioned, displayed, as if the creature was making a territorial statement. Dr. Kim studied the crime scene photos with growing alarm. "This is ritualistic behavior, Doug. The creature isn't just hunting for food, establishing dominance, marking its territory with deliberate displays of power." I stared at the images of 3 skilled climbers arranged like trophies and felt something cold settle in my stomach. This wasn't just a predator defending its territory anymore. This was warfare, and the creature was winning. "We have to kill it," I said finally, "before it kills anyone else." Sarah looked up from the photographs, her face pale but determined. "Then we better figure out how to fight something that can fly, screams loud enough to cause avalanches, and is smart enough to use military tactics against us." I loaded fresh batteries into my headlamp and checked the climbing gear I'd need for what I was planning. "I've got some ideas about that." The direct confrontation came during what should have been a routine rescue mission. A pair of climbers had missed their check-in on Mount Challenger, same peak where we'd discovered the creature's nest. Standard protocol required a search and rescue operation, but I knew we weren't looking for stranded climbers anymore. We were walking into the creature's prime hunting ground. I went alone. Jenny Alvarez wanted to fly support. Dr. Kim wanted to come as an observer, but I couldn't risk anyone else getting killed. This thing had been studying us, learning our tactics, adapting its hunting strategies based on human behavior. It was time to give it something it hadn't seen before. I rappelled from the helicopter onto a narrow ledge 500 feet below the nest site, carrying specialized equipment I'd requisitioned from the Military Explosive Ordnance Disposal Unit at Fort Lewis. If I couldn't outfight the creature, Maybe I could engineer a solution that didn't require superior strength or flight capability. The missing climbers were easy to find. They'd been added to the creature's collection, their bodies arranged around the nest like some grotesque shrine. But they weren't dead. They were paralyzed, conscious but unable to move, watching me with eyes that begged for help. That's when I realized the creature wasn't just killing climbers. It was keeping them alive, storing them like food in a larder. The nest itself was a monument to the creature's hunting success. Dozens of climbing helmets, hundreds of carabiners, ice axes, ropes, all woven into a structure that spoke of intelligence and planning. But most disturbing were the bones, human bones, some old enough to be bleached white, others still carrying scraps of modern synthetic clothing. This thing had been hunting climbers for decades. I was setting the first explosive charge when it found me. The creature dropped from somewhere above, landing on the ledge with supernatural silence. Up close, it was even more terrifying than our helicopter encounter had suggested. 8 feet tall, when upright, covered in coarse dark hair that seemed to absorb light. The wings weren't feathered like a bird's, they were leathery membranes, stretched between elongated finger bones, like a massive bat's but with human-like articulation. Its face was the worst part. Humanoid enough to suggest intelligence, but wrong in every detail. The skull was elongated, the jaw protruded too far forward, and the eyes reflected red light, like mirrors. When it opened its mouth, I saw rows of teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. But it was the eyes that nearly killed me. The creature fixed its gaze on mine, and suddenly I couldn't move. Not paralyzed by fear, literally unable to control. My muscles, my legs locked, my arms dropped to my sides. Even my breathing became shallow and automatic. The creature's eyes were projecting some kind of infrared pattern that disrupted my visual cortex, hijacking my nervous system. It took a step closer, studying me like a specimen. I could smell its breath-rotting meat, and something else, something ancient and foul. It reached out with one taloned hand and traced the outline of my climbing helmet, almost gently. That's when my emergency training saved my life. The helmet's reflective surface deflected enough of the creature's hypnotic effect to break the paralysis. I jerked backward, fumbling for the detonator in my pack. The creature screamed. At close range, the sound was devastating. My eardrums ruptured instantly, blood running down my neck. The vibrations were so intense I felt my heart skip beats, my vision blur. But I'd been prepared for this: foam earplugs under industrial hearing protection, plus a climbing helmet designed to deflect sonic energy. I triggered the first explosive charge. The blast brought down a section of the cliff face above us, tons of granite crashing down where we'd been standing. But the creature's reflexes were spread its wings and leaped into the air, riding the shockwave like a thermal updraft. It circled above me, screaming again, and I heard the rumble of avalanche starting on the slopes below. The creature was using its sonic weapon to trigger a massive nervish snowslide, planning to bury me under thousands of tons of snow and ice. I had maybe 30 seconds before the avalanche reached this elevation. I triggered the second charge, then the third, bringing down more of the cliff face. Not trying to kill the creature directly, it was too fast, too maneuverable. But I could destroy its nest, eliminate its base of operations, force it to relocate. The creature realized what I was doing and dove toward me, talons extended. Rappelled off the ledge just as it struck, its claws missing my head by inches. It tried to follow, but its wings couldn't maneuver effectively in the narrow vertical space between cliff walls. I activated the final explosive charge and kept repelling, racing the avalanche that was now thundering down the mountainside. Above me, the creature's nest disintegrated in a cascade of falling rock. Decades of collected trophies scattered across the slopes. The creature's scream of rage followed me down the cliff face, a sound of pure fury that made the mountain itself seem to tremble. But when I reached the bottom and looked back up, I couldn't see it anywhere. The avalanche I'd triggered buried the nest site under 40 feet of snow and granite. For the first time in months, the creature's hunting ground was truly inaccessible. Dr. Kim met me at the base camp, her face showing relief and concern in equal measure. "Did you kill it?" I stripped off my damaged hearing protection, my ears still ringing from the explosive charges and the creature's sonic attacks. "No, but I took away its home." "Maybe that's enough." For 2 weeks, there were no more attacks. The climbing routes around Mount Challenger remained quiet, free of the supernatural predation that had terrorized experienced mountaineers. I allowed myself to believe that maybe I'd solved the problem, that destroying the nest had driven the creature away permanently. I was wrong. The attacks resumed 3 weeks later, but the creature had learned from our encounter. Instead of maintaining a single large nest, it established multiple smaller sites throughout the North Cascades. Instead of hunting in a concentrated area, it ranged across the entire mountain region. Instead of leaving obvious evidence, it became more careful about concealing its kills. Dr. Kim documented the changes with scientific precision, but I could see the toll our experiences were taking on her. She'd developed chronic insomnia and a phobia of aircraft that made field research nearly impossible. After 6 months of ground-based observations, she requested a transfer to a research position in Montana, far from any peaks tall enough to hide flying predators. "I can't stop thinking about those eyes," she told me during our final meeting. "The intelligence behind them. We're not dealing with an animal, Doug. We're dealing with something that thinks, plans, adapts. Something that's been here longer than human civilization and has no intention of letting us claim its territory." I implemented an unofficial warning system for climbing guides, using coded radio transmissions to alert them about severe weather conditions in areas where the creature had been active. It wasn't perfect. Experienced climbers are attracted to danger, not deterred by IT, but it reduced casualties. I also developed safety seminars that emphasized unusual wildlife hazards in high-altitude areas. Without specifically mentioning flying predators, I taught climbers to camp in groups, to maintain constant vigilance during dawn and dusk hours, to carry emergency beacons that could summon immediate helicopter extraction. But I couldn't save them all. Over the next 5 years, the creature killed 17 more climbers that I know of, probably more that were never reported, bodies that simply disappeared in the vast wilderness of the North Cascades. Each death weighed on me, another failure to protect the people who trusted these mountains with their lives. The creature's hunting patterns evolved constantly. It learned to avoid areas with helicopter support, to target solo climbers who couldn't, call for help, to hunt during weather conditions that prevented air rescue operations. It began taking climbers from populated routes, removing them so efficiently that their partners often didn't realize anything was wrong until they found empty tents and shredded sleeping bags. I retired from helicopter rescue operations in 1992, officially due to hearing damage sustained during explosive ordnance training. Unofficially, I'd developed a paralyzing fear of heights that made rescue work impossible. Every time I looked down from altitude, I imagined something with 12-foot wings and hypnotic eyes rising from the shadows below. My replacement was a young ranger named Michael Torres, enthusiastic and skilled, but unprepared for what was hunting in these mountains. I tried to warn him, sharing what I could without sounding insane. But how do you explain that perfect climbing conditions and experienced mountaineers mean nothing when something ancient and intelligent is using the peaks as hunting grounds? On my last day of active duty, I stood in the ranger station looking out at the endless peaks of the North Cascades. Somewhere up there, the creature was still hunting, still learning, still adding to its collection of human trophies. New climbers arrived every season, drawn by the challenging routes and pristine wilderness, unaware that they were entering a territory claimed by something that had been here since before humans learned to climb. I wrote detailed reports about every encounter, every piece of evidence, every tactical observation I'd made during 5 years of fighting an impossible war. I sealed those reports in my personnel file with instructions that they only be opened if climbing fatalities in the area exceeded normal statistical parameters. The reports are still there, waiting for someone else to discover what I learned. That some peaks have guardians older than human ambition, creatures that view our modern climbing equipment as toys and our technical expertise as irrelevant. The North Cascades contain thousands of square miles of unmapped wilderness, peaks that rise from primordial forests into air so thin that conventional aircraft can barely function, perfect hunting grounds for something that flies. I keep a scanner tuned to the ranger frequencies, monitoring search and rescue operations throughout the Pacific Northwest. Every few months, I hear reports that sound familiar. Experienced climbers found dead in impossible locations, bodies showing damage consistent with falls from extreme heights, evidence of attacks by unknown wildlife. The creature is still out there, still hunting, still learning. Sometimes I get calls from young rangers who found my old reports, asking for advice about unusual predation patterns in their districts. I tell them what I can, but mostly I tell them this: respect the heights, or they'll claim you permanently. The mountains keep their secrets, and some secrets have teeth. My name is Timothy Kowalski, and I've been a ranger in the Boundary Waters for 27 years. People call me Tim. I'm telling you this story because the pack is still out there, and someone needs to know the truth. I grew up on the Iron Range, where my dad worked the mines, and my grandpa taught me to track deer through snow so deep it came up to my chest. Polish family, hard workers, people who understood that the wilderness doesn't care about your plans or your comfort. When I was young, I worked the logging camps before becoming a ranger. I know every lake, every portage, every hidden creek in this place. At 52, I thought I'd seen everything the Boundary Waters could throw at me. I've pulled bodies from icy lakes, tracked lost hikers through blizzards, and faced down black bears protecting their cubs. I've studied wolves for 2 decades, tracked every pack in northern Minnesota. I know their sounds, their patterns, their territories. Until October 1984, I thought I knew wolves. That's when I found the ones that shouldn't exist. It started with reports from the canoe outfitters, unusual howls across a 100-square-mile area, not just loud howls, but coordinated ones. Like a choir, they said. Like the wolves were talking to each other in ways that didn't make sense. Then came the tracks. Joe Henderson, who runs Wilderness Outfitters in Ely, called me on a Tuesday morning. His voice was shaky, which wasn't like Joe. The man had guided hunters and fishermen for 30 years. "Tim, you need to see these tracks," he said. 8 inches long, maybe more. I've never seen anything like them. I drove out to Moose Lake where Joe was waiting with his measuring tape and camera. The tracks were in soft mud near the shoreline, clear as day, 8.5 inches from heel to toe. A normal wolf track runs about 4.5 inches. These were 50% larger than the biggest wolves I'd ever documented. But size wasn't the strangest thing. The tracks showed a pack of 12 wolves moving in perfect formation through difficult terrain. They maintained exact spacing between each animal, like soldiers marching. I'd never seen wild wolves move with that kind of discipline. "Look at this," Joe said, pointing to a series of tracks near a fallen log. They all stepped in the exact same spots, one after another, like they were following orders. I knelt down and studied the prints. The depth was consistent, showing wolves of similar weight. But the pattern was wrong. Wild wolves wander, they explore, they break formation to investigate scents. These tracks showed a group moving with a single purpose, following a leader without question. "Joe, when did your regular wolves leave the area?" He looked puzzled. "You know, now that you mention it, I haven't heard the Moose Lake pack in weeks, or the Sawbill pack. Come to think of it, the whole area's been quiet, except for these new howls." That's when I knew something was seriously wrong. Wolf packs don't abandon good territory without a reason. They defend their hunting grounds from other wolves, but every established pack in a 100-square-mile area had vanished at the same time. I spent the next 3 days walking the territory, documenting what I found. Moose carcasses killed by single wolves. That should be impossible. A moose is 6 feet tall and weighs 800 pounds. Even a big wolf can't bring down a moose alone. But here were kill sites where one set of tracks led to a dead moose with its neck broken clean. Multiple kill sites showed attacks happening at the same time across 20 miles of wilderness. I found 4 dead deer that had been killed within the same hour, based on blood patterns and body temperature. No pack could coordinate attacks across that distance, not unless they could talk to each other in ways that went beyond normal animal communication. I knew I needed help, professional help. I called Dr. Mark Hansen from the University of Minnesota. Mark was a wildlife biologist who specialized in wolf behavior. He'd published papers on pack hunting strategies and communication patterns. If anyone could explain what I was seeing, it would be Mark. "Tim, you're describing behaviors that don't exist in wolves," Mark said over the phone. "Pack coordination breaks down over distances greater than a mile. What you're suggesting would require intelligence levels that wolves simply don't possess." "Then come see for yourself," I told him. Mark arrived 3 days later with Jenny Walsh, a wildlife photographer from Duluth. Jenny was young, maybe 25, with red hair and green eyes that missed nothing. She'd won awards for her pictures of wolves and bears. Her telephoto lens could capture details from half a mile away. We set up base camp at Knife Lake, right in the middle of the territory where I'd been finding the strange tracks. The first night was quiet, too quiet. No loons calling, no owls hooting, even the wind seemed muffled. "Where are all the normal sounds?" Jenny asked, as we sat around the campfire. "That's what worries me," I said. "This area used to be full of life, now it feels empty." Mark was studying my track photos and measurements. "The size is definitely outside normal parameters," he admitted, "but the behavioral patterns you're describing, there has to be a rational explanation." That's when we heard the first howl. It started low, deep enough to feel in your chest. Then other voices joined in, creating harmonies that no wolf pack should be able to make. The sound surrounded us, coming from every direction. It wasn't random calling. It was organized, planned. "That's not normal wolf communication," Mark whispered. Jenny was already setting up her camera with a long lens. I can see movement in the trees, about 200 yards north. Through her viewfinder, she could make out shapes moving between the pines, large shapes, moving with purpose. "They're bigger than any wolves I've photographed," she said, "and they're watching us." The howling continued for 10 minutes, then stopped all at once, like someone had given a signal. The silence that followed felt heavy, oppressive. "They're still out there," I said. "I can feel them." Over the next 2 days, we documented the pack's presence without direct contact. Jenny's telephoto lens captured images of wolves that were clearly outside normal size ranges. The largest one, which we started calling the Alpha, measured over 7 feet from nose to tail and easily weighed 200 pounds. But size wasn't the most disturbing thing we discovered. On the second day, we found evidence that the pack was using tools. Logs had been deliberately moved to create bridges across streams. Rocks had been arranged to funnel deer toward ambush points. This wasn't instinct. This was planning. "Wolves don't use environmental manipulation in their hunting strategies," Mark said, studying photos of a carefully constructed rock funnel. "This level of problem solving requires abstract thinking." Jenny was getting pictures of individual pack members. Each wolf was massive, but they moved with a grace that seemed almost human. Their eyes showed intelligence that made her uncomfortable. "Tim, they know we're documenting them," she said. "Look at this shot." The photo showed the Alpha staring directly into her lens from 300 yards away. Its eyes were pale blue, almost white, and it was looking at the camera like it understood exactly what it was. "That's impossible," Mark said. "Wolves don't have that level of awareness about human technology." But I was starting to realize that these weren't normal wolves. That night, they came closer. We woke to find our camp surrounded. Not attacked, just surrounded. 12 massive shapes stood in a perfect circle 50 yards from our tents. They'd moved into position without making a sound. Through the firelight, I could see the Alpha directly in front of our camp. It sat like a dog, but its head came up to the height of a man's chest. Its pale eyes reflected the flames as it watched us with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. "Nobody move," I whispered. We sat frozen for an hour while the pack maintained their positions. They weren't threatening us, just ... studying us, like they were trying to figure out what we were doing in their territory. Finally, the Alpha stood and walked away. The others followed in the same perfect formation I'd seen in the tracks. Single file, exact spacing, no deviation. "That was a message," I said after they disappeared. "A message about what?" Mark asked. "They're letting us know this is their territory, and they're deciding whether to let us stay." The next morning, Jenny was different. She'd barely slept, claiming she could hear the wolves talking all night. "Not howling," she said, "talking like voices in my head." Mark checked her for signs of exhaustion or stress. "Jenny, you've been under a lot of pressure. Lack of sleep can cause auditory hallucinations." But I was starting to hear things too. Not voices exactly, but a presence in my mind, like someone standing just behind me, trying to get my attention. We decided to track the pack to learn more about their hunting patterns. Following their trail led us to areas where normal wolves had never ventured. They were hunting in territories that should have been too difficult to navigate, crossing rocky terrain that would challenge human hikers. The pack was moving through the wilderness like they had a map. At Saginaga Lake, we found something that changed everything. The pack had killed a bull moose, but not in any way I'd ever seen. The animal had been brought down by a single wolf. The neck was broken with surgical precision. No struggle marks, no defensive wounds. "This is impossible," Mark said, examining the carcass. "A single wolf cannot generate enough force to break a moose's neck cleanly." Jenny was taking pictures, but her hands were shaking. "There's something else," she said. "Look at the positioning." The moose had been moved after death, arranged. Its body was positioned facing east, its antlers arranged in a specific pattern. This wasn't just a kill, it was a ritual. "Wolves don't engage in ceremonial behavior," Mark said. That's when we heard Robert Jardine calling our names from the shoreline. Robert was an Ojibwe elder from the Grand Portage Reservation. He'd been a friend of mine for 15 years, helping me understand the cultural significance of various areas in the Boundary Waters. He was 73 years old, with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. "Tim, you need to leave this area," he said without any greeting. "You're in danger." "Robert, what do you know about these wolves?" He looked at the arranged moose carcass, and his face grew serious. "These are not wolves. These are Waila guardians, and you have disturbed something you do not understand." Robert explained that Ojibwe traditions spoke of giant wolves with human intelligence that protected sacred hunting grounds. They were guardians of the balance between the human world and the spirit world. "Your modern science cannot explain them because they are not entirely of this world," Robert said. "They have existed here for centuries, passing knowledge from one generation to the next." Mark was skeptical. "Robert, with all due respect, we're dealing with an unknown wolf subspecies. There has to be a scientific explanation." "Dr. Hansen, science explains many things, but not everything." That afternoon, while Mark continued his analysis of the kill site, Jenny and I followed more tracks. The trail led to a clearing where we found something that made no sense. The pack had arranged stones in complex patterns, geometric designs that covered an area the size of a football field. The patterns were too precise, too mathematical to be random. They looked like symbols. "Jenny, are you getting this?" She was taking pictures, but her behavior was becoming erratic. She kept talking to herself, sometimes in sounds that didn't seem human. "They're showing us their history," she said. "The stones tell stories. Stories about this place, about the people who came before." "Jenny, you're starting to worry me." She turned to look at me, and her eyes seemed different, wilder. "Tim, they're not just wolves, they're teachers, and they want to teach us." That night, the pack came to our camp again, but this time they came closer. The alpha approached to within 20 yards of our fire. I could see its massive frame clearly now, 7 feet long, chest deep as a barrel, legs thick as fence posts. Its pale blue eyes held an intelligence that was definitely not animal. And then something happened that I still don't fully understand. The alpha looked directly at me, and suddenly my mind was flooded with images, pictures that weren't mine, memories of the forest from centuries past, native hunting parties following ancient protocols, wolves and humans living in careful balance. I saw the pack's history, generations of these massive wolves passing down knowledge, protecting sacred areas, maintaining the old agreements between species. And I understood that we had violated something. We had entered their territory without permission, without respect for the old ways. The mental contact lasted only seconds, but it left me shaken. The alpha seemed satisfied that its message had been received. It turned and walked away, the pack following. "Did you see that?" I asked Mark. "See what?" The wolf looked at you and then left. But Jenny had seen something. "It spoke to you," she said. "I could feel it too. It's trying to decide whether we're a threat." Mark was becoming frustrated with both of us. "You're both suffering from exhaustion and stress. Wolves do not communicate telepathically." The next morning, Mark decided to take action. He'd brought tranquilizer equipment, planning to capture one of the wolves for detailed study. "Mark, I don't think that's a good idea," I warned. "Tim, these animals need to be studied scientifically. If they're a new subspecies, they could be the discovery of the century." Jenny was becoming more agitated. "You can't capture them," she said. "They're not specimens, they're guardians." But Mark had made up his mind. He set up his equipment near a game trail the pack had been using. When the alpha appeared at dusk, Mark fired his tranquilizer dart. The dart hit the alpha in the shoulder. The massive wolf stopped, looked at the dart, then looked directly at Mark. What happened next was swift and terrible. The entire pack appeared from the forest. 12 massive wolves moving with coordinated precision. They surrounded Mark before he could reload his tranquilizer gun. The alpha, apparently unaffected by the drug, walked up to Mark and stared into his eyes for a long moment. Then it struck. The attack was over in seconds. Mark never had a chance to scream. The pack didn't eat him. They didn't need to. This was justice, not hunger. The Alpha looked at me and Jenny across the clearing. I felt that mental pressure again, but this time the message was clear. Some humans could be tolerated, others could not. Mark had crossed a line that should not be crossed. Jenny ran toward Mark's body, but I grabbed her arm. "Don't," I said. "They're still watching." The pack had withdrawn to the edge of the clearing, but their eyes never left us. The Alpha sat beside Mark's body like a guardian, its pale blue eyes fixed on me. Jenny was crying, but her tears seemed strange. Not grief, exactly, but something else. Like she was crying for Mark's lack of understanding rather than his death. He couldn't hear them, she said. They tried to warn him, but he couldn't hear. I was beginning to understand that Jenny was changing. The pack's mental communications were affecting her differently than they affected me. Where I received brief images and feelings, she seemed to be developing a constant connection. "Jenny, we need to get out of here." "No," she said firmly. "We need to stay. They have more to show us." I tried to use my radio to call for help, but it was dead. All our electronic equipment had stopped working. The pack seemed to have some ability to interfere with our technology. That night, Robert Jordying appeared at our camp again. Somehow, he'd known what happened. Dr. Hansen could not accept what he did not understand, Robert said. The Weiler gave him chances to leave with respect. He chose violence instead. "Robert, what do they want from us?" "They want you to understand the old agreements. This land is not just wilderness. It is sacred, and it has guardians." Robert taught me the protocols that his people had used for centuries when entering Weiler territory. Specific rituals of respect, offerings of tobacco, acknowledgements of the pack's authority. "If you follow the old ways, they will let you leave," Robert said. "But you must understand that you have seen something that changes everything." Jenny was listening, but she seemed distant. She kept looking toward the forest where the pack waited. "I don't want to leave," she said quietly. "Jenny, what are you talking about?" "They're offering me something, a choice. I can stay with them, learn from them, become part of the pack." I thought she was having a breakdown from the stress of Mark's death. But as the night continued, I began to realize she was serious. The Alpha appeared at the edge of our firelight. Jenny stood up and walked toward it without fear. The massive wolf lowered its head, and Jenny placed her hand on its muzzle. The connection between them was visible. Jenny's eyes took on the same pale blue color as the wolf's. She stood straighter, moved differently, more like a predator than prey. "They've existed here for hundreds of years," she said. Her voice changed. "Protecting the balance, but the modern world is disrupting everything. They need someone who can bridge both worlds." "Jenny, you're talking about giving up your humanity." "No, Tim. I'm talking about expanding it." The Alpha looked at me, and I felt that mental pressure again. But this time, the communication was clearer. The pack was showing me their purpose. They weren't just guardians of territory. They were guardians of the relationship between humans and the natural world. As modern civilization expanded, that relationship was breaking down. The pack needed allies who could understand both worlds. "They're offering me knowledge," Jenny said. "Understanding that no human has had for centuries. I can learn to see the forest the way they do, to protect it the way they do." I realized that this wasn't madness. This was transformation. "If you stay, you can't come back," I told her. "I know." The Alpha walked back into the forest. Jenny followed without looking back. That left me alone with Mark's body and Robert's wisdom. "You have a choice too," Robert said. "You can try to report what happened here, try to bring more scientists and government officials into this place, or you can help protect the secret." I looked at Mark's body and knew what I had to do. Using Robert's protocols, I approached the edge of the clearing where the pack waited. I offered tobacco and spoke the words Robert had taught me, acknowledging the pack's authority and asking permission to leave their territory. The Alpha appeared and looked into my eyes one final time. The mental contact was different now, less intrusive, more respectful. I felt the pack's acceptance of my submission to their authority. They would let me leave, but there were conditions. I had to become their ally. I had to protect their territory from future intrusions, and I had to keep their secret. In return, they would allow controlled human access to their lands as long as the old protocols were followed. The Alpha stepped aside, granting me passage. I carried Mark's body out of the wilderness and filed an official report listing his death as a tragic wildlife encounter. Jenny was recorded as lost in wilderness accident. Though I knew exactly where she was, I implemented discrete restrictions on camping in the park's territory. Using environmental protection regulations as cover, certain areas became off-limits during specific seasons. Permits became harder to get for regions the park considered most sacred. Most people accepted the new restrictions without question. A few asked questions, but I had standard answers about protecting sensitive ecosystems and endangered species. Robert Jourdain and I developed a system for monitoring the park's territory without interference. We trained a few trusted tribal members to recognize signs of Waila activity and report any problems. Over the years, there have been occasional sightings of a woman running with wolves. Hikers sometimes report seeing a red-haired figure moving through the forest with inhuman speed and grace. I know these reports are accurate. Jenny has become something between human and wolf, serving as a bridge between worlds. The pack's territory has gradually expanded as they've demonstrated successful integration of a human member. They've become more tolerant of human presence during summer months, but remain aggressive during winter hunting season. I've learned to work with Ojibwe authorities to maintain cultural protocols that respect the pack's sovereignty. We ensure that visitors understand this isn't just wilderness, it's someone's home, and that someone has rules. 27 years later, I'm retiring from the ranger service, but I'm not leaving the boundary waters. My job now is to pass on what I've learned to the next generation of guardians. The pack is still out there, still protecting the old boundaries, still maintaining the balance that keeps our world from falling into chaos. If you ever find yourself in the deep wilderness of northern Minnesota, pay attention to the signs. Tracks that are too big, howls that sound too organized, silences that feel too heavy. Respect the old agreements. Offer tobacco. Acknowledge the authority of those who were here first. Some boundaries aren't marked on maps. They're enforced by guardians older than our laws, wiser than our science, and more patient than our politics. The boundary waters belong to the wolves. We're just visitors, and if you're very lucky, you might earn the right to stay. My name is Edward Whitehorse, and 40 years ago, I learned that some places are protected by more than park rangers. People call me Eddie. I've been a ranger at Mesa Verde National Park in Colorado since 1957, but my story really begins years later, in the summer of 1959. I was 29 then, fresh out of college with an anthropology degree and full of big ideas about protecting our cultural heritage. Being Ute, I grew up hearing stories about the old places. My grandmother spoke our language to me when I was small, told me about the ancient people who built the cliff dwellings before vanishing into legend. She said they never really left, that spirits still watched over their sacred sites. I respected those stories as part of our culture, but I never believed ancient. Spirits still walked among the ruins. That was my first mistake. Mesa Verde sits in the high desert of southwestern Colorado, where red sandstone cliffs shelter hundreds of ancient buildings. The ancestral Pueblones built them between 600 and 1300 AD, then disappeared. Nobody knows exactly why they left, but they abandoned entire cities carved into cliff faces, leaving behind pottery, tools, and secrets that draw people from around the world. In 1959, tourism was booming. Every day brought busloads of visitors eager to see Cliff, Palace, Balcony House, and the other ruins. Most came with respect and wonder, but some came for different reasons. The problem started small. A broken pot here, a missing artifact there. We figured tourists were taking souvenirs, which happened at every park. But by June, we realized something bigger was going on. Professional thieves were targeting our sites, breaking into restricted areas at night to steal ceremonial objects and burial goods. The park was understaffed and underfunded. We had maybe 6 rangers covering 52,000 acres of rugged terrain. At night, it was just me and old Tom Bradley making rounds in a single truck. We couldn't watch every cliff dwelling, every hidden alcove where priceless artifacts waited in the dark. Then the deaths started. The first sign of trouble came on June 15th. I was doing my morning patrol when I found fresh tire tracks near the Cliff Palace ruins. Someone had driven off the main road during the night, parking in the trees where casual visitors wouldn't see them. I followed boot prints to the rope that tourists use to access the ruins, but the tracks ended at the cliff edge. 30 feet below, Clayton Morris hung motionless against the sandstone wall. At first, I thought he'd fallen while trying to sneak into the ruins. Rock climbing wasn't uncommon, even though it was strictly forbidden. But when I rappelled down to check on him, I found something that made my blood turn cold. Maurice wasn't hanging against the wall. He was inside it. His body was embedded in solid stone, arms and legs pressed into the rock face like he'd been pushed into wet concrete that had hardened around him. Only his head and chest stuck out, twisted at impossible angles. His eyes were wide with terror, mouth frozen open in a silent scream. I'd seen death before. Car accidents, heart attacks, the occasional climbing mishap. But this was different. This was wrong in ways that made my skin crawl and my mind rebel against what I was seeing. The medical examiner, Dr. Sarah Chen, arrived from Durango 2 hours later. She was a practical woman who'd seen everything the Four Corners region could offer, but even she went pale when she saw Morris's body. "How is this possible?" she asked, running her hands over the stone. "This sandstone has been solid for millions of years. You can't just push someone into it." We spent the rest of the day trying to understand what we'd found. The rock showed no tool marks, no signs of drilling or blasting. Maurice's body was simply part of the cliff face, as if the stone had briefly turned liquid before hardening again. Dr. Chen's autopsy report was equally baffling. Morris had died from massive trauma, consistent with being crushed by tremendous pressure, but there were no external wounds. Every bone in his body was broken, every organ ruptured, yet his skin was unbroken. "It's like he was squeezed from the inside," Dr. Chen told me privately. "I've never seen anything like it." That night, I called my grandmother. She listened quietly as I described what we'd found, her breathing slow and steady on the other end of the line. "Eddie," she said finally, "what was that man doing in the sacred place?" I told her about the tire tracks, the boot prints, the small leather bag we'd found near Morris's car filled with pottery shards and arrowheads. Grandmother was quiet for a long time. When she spoke again, her voice was different, worried. "The old ones are still there, Eddie. They never left their homes, and they don't like thieves." The second death came 3 days later. Helen Garrett was an amateur archaeologist from Denver who'd been visiting Mesa Verde for years. She knew the rules about staying on designated trails and not removing artifacts, but she also knew which rangers were working which shifts and how to avoid our patrols. What she didn't know was that she was being watched by something that didn't carry a badge. I found her at Balcony House on June 18th. After a tourist group reported screaming from the ruins during their guided tours, the visitors were huddled together near the entrance, pale and shaking. Their guide, Janet Morrison, met me at the cliff edge with tears in her eyes. She just sank into the ground, Janet whispered. 1 second she was digging with a trowel. The next second the stone was pulling her down like quicksand. I followed Janet to a small alcove behind the main structure where tourists weren't supposed to go. Helen Garrett knelt in the center of the space, but only from the waist up. The rest of her body had disappeared into the sandstone floor, leaving her torso protruding from solid rock, like some grotesque sculpture. Unlike Maurice, Helen was still alive when I found her. "Barely can't move," she gasped, her face white. With shock. "It's got me. Something's got me." "What happened?" I asked, kneeling beside her. "What were you doing back here?" Her eyes were wild with terror. "Digging for pot shards. Found a burial site. Started to dig, and the ground, ... The ground just opened up and grabbed me." I tried to get my hands around her shoulders to pull her free, but the stone was solid. There was no gap, no space where the rock ended and her body began. She was part of the cliff floor now, trapped in stone that felt as hard as iron. Helen died while we waited for the rescue team, just stopped breathing, her eyes fixed on something I couldn't see. Dr. Chen's examination revealed the same impossible injuries, massive internal trauma without external wounds, as if enormous pressure had crushed her from all directions. But it was the tourist testimony that really shook me. 5 people, including Janet, swore they'd watched Helen sink into solid stone. They described the sandstone floor turning dark and wet around her legs, flowing like thick mud before hardening. "Again, rock doesn't do that," Dr. Chen said. When I told her sandstone can't change phases like that, it's geologically impossible, I knew she was right. I also knew what I'd seen with my own eyes. That evening, I drove to the cultural center and found Samuel Black Bear, an elder from the Ute Mountain tribe, who served as our cultural consultant. Samuel was in his 70s, a keeper of the old stories who helped us understand the spiritual significance of the archaeological sites. I told him about both deaths, describing the impossible ways Maurice and Garrett had been killed. "Samuel," listened without interruption, his weathered hands folded in his lap, his dark eyes serious. They were stealing from the burial grounds. He said when I finished this, "But, Samuel, people don't just sink into stone. That's not how the world works." Samuel smiled sadly. "That's how your world works, Eddie. The old world has different rules." He stood and walked to a display case containing petroglyphs, photographed throughout the park. His finger traced a specific image, a tall figure emerging from a rock. Face, its arms outstretched, eyes like glowing coals. "Stone Walker," Samuel said, "guardian of the sacred places. My grandfather's grandfather told stories about him. When the ancient people left Mesa Verde, they asked the spirits of the earth to watch over their homes, to protect the things they couldn't take with them." I stared at the petroglyph. The figure was clearly humanoid, but wrong somehow, as if carved by someone who'd seen a person but didn't quite understand human proportions. It was too tall, too broad, with features that seemed more geological than biological. "You think this thing is real?" "I think," Samuel said carefully, "that there are guardians in this world who don't carry guns or badges, and I think they're getting angry." That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Helen Garrett's last words, about the terror in her eyes as Stone pulled her down. Around midnight, I gave up and drove back to the park. Mesa Verde at night is a different place. The familiar trails become mysterious pathways leading into darkness. The cliff dwellings turn into black mouths in the rock face, empty windows staring out like dead eyes. Every shadow could hide secrets. Every sound could be something more than wind. I parked near Cliff Palace and walked the perimeter with my flashlight, looking for signs of fresh activity. The beams swept across ancient walls, revealing doorways and windows built by hands that had been dust for centuries. That's when I saw the footprints. They were pressed into soft earth near the main structure, but these weren't made by hiking boots or sneakers. Each print was huge, maybe 18 inches long and 8 inches wide, with no clear heel or toe definition. They looked like they'd been made by feet carved from stone, leaving deep impressions that seemed too heavy for any human. I followed the trail with my heart pounding, my breath coming in short gasps. The prints led from the parking area directly to the ruins, then disappeared at the rock face, as if whatever made them had simply walked through solid stone. Standing there in the darkness, surrounded by the weight of centuries and the whisper of wind through empty windows, I finally understood what Samuel had been trying to tell me. Some guardians don't need badges. Some protectors are older than laws, older than governments, older than the concept of civilization itself, and some of them are made of stone. The third death happened 5 days later, and this time there was a witness. Robert Kane was a professional antiquities dealer from Phoenix who supplied black market artifacts to private collectors across the country. Unlike Maurice and Garrett, Kane came prepared. He had climbing equipment, night vision goggles, and a sophisticated plan to strip Longhouse of its most valuable pieces. What he didn't have was respect. Dr. Patricia Wells, a geologist from the University of Colorado, was studying sandstone formations in the area as part of her doctoral research. She'd received permission to take rock samples and measurements at various sites, work that required her to be in the ruins during off hours when tourists weren't around. She was the only person who saw what happened to Kane. I found Dr. Wells the next morning, sitting in her truck outside the park entrance with her hands shaking so badly she couldn't hold her coffee cup. She was a practical woman in her 30s, someone who dealt in facts and measurements and logical explanations. But the facts she'd witnessed had shattered her understanding of what was possible. "I heard voices around midnight," she told me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thought it might be late-night hikers, so I went to check. Found this man with excavation tools, digging into the wall of Longhouse. He had a whole collection of artifacts in a bag. Dr. Wells had confronted Kane, telling him he was destroying an irreplaceable archaeological site. Kane had laughed, said nobody would miss a few old pots and arrowheads. That's when the wall started moving," she said. "I waited, knowing that whatever came next would be something that would change everything. The sandstone began to flow like water, dark and thick. And something came out of it. Something that looked like a man but wasn't. It was huge, maybe 9 feet tall, made of the same stone as the cliff face. Its eyes glowed like amber, and when it moved, I could hear rock grinding against rock. The entity, the Guardian, had reached for Kane with hands the size of dinner plates. Kane had tried to run, but the stone floor beneath his feet had turned soft, trapping his legs like quicksand. He was screaming, Dr. Wells continued, begging. The thing didn't speak, but I could feel what it was thinking. It was ancient, patient, and absolutely furious about what Cain was doing to its sacred place. The guardian had placed its hands on Cain's chest and pushed, not violently, but with steady, inexorable pressure. The stone wall behind Cain had opened to receive him, flowing around his body like thick liquid before hardening again. When it was over, Dr. Wells said, the wall looked exactly like it had before, except for Cain's face. His face was still, visible, trapped in the stone, mouth open in a scream that would last forever. I drove to Longhouse with Dr. Wells and found exactly what she'd described. Cain's face stared out from the ancient wall, frozen in eternal terror. His excavation tools lay scattered on the ground, along with a leather bag containing stolen artifacts that seemed to pulse with their own dark energy. Dr. Wells used her geological equipment to take readings around the site. What she found defied everything she'd learned about rock formation and mineral composition. The stone where Cain is embedded shows molecular changes, she explained, holding up her scanner. The crystalline structure has been reorganized at the atomic level. It's still sandstone, but it's been altered, improved, made stronger. Is that possible? Not according to any natural process we understand. This would require precise control over molecular bonds, the ability to change matter at the quantum level. It's technology so advanced it might as well be magic. That afternoon, Park Superintendent Richard Crawford called me into his office. Crawford was a political appointee who cared more about visitor numbers and revenue than archaeological preservation. The mysterious deaths were becoming a public relations nightmare. 3 bodies in 5 days. Whitehorse, he said, tapping a folder full of newspaper clippings. The press is calling it everything from a serial killer to a government cover-up. We need answers. The answer is simple, I told him. These people were thieves. They were stealing from sacred sites, and something is protecting those sites. Crawford's face reddened. Something? What kind of report is that? I need facts, not folklore. The fact is that artifact theft has dropped to 0 since these deaths started. Word is spreading through the black market that Mesa Verde is too dangerous to touch. Isn't that what we want? What I want, Crawford said, is a rational explanation that won't scare away legitimate tourists. Figure it out, or I'll find someone who can. I left his office knowing I had to make a choice. I could write a report blaming the deaths on geological hazards or equipment failure, something that would satisfy Crawford and protect my job. Or I could tell the truth and risk everything. That night, I made my decision. I drove to Balcony House after dark, parked my truck, and walked into the ruins without a flashlight. If the Guardian was real, if it was protecting these places, then I needed to understand what it wanted. The moon was nearly full, casting everything in silver, light that made the ancient walls look like they were glowing from within. I walked slowly through the main structure, calling out in both English and what I remembered of the Ute language my grandmother had taught me. I'm not here to steal, I said to the shadows. I'm here to protect these places, just like you. But I need to understand. I need to know what you want. For a long time, nothing happened. I began to think I was talking to empty ruins, that Dr. Wells had suffered some kind of breakdown and imagined everything she'd described. Then the shadows started moving. It began as a subtle shift in the darkness, like clouds passing over the moon. But the moon wasn't moving, and there were no clouds. The shadows were gathering, pooling together in the center of the main room like spilled ink. The temperature dropped 20 degrees in seconds. My breath came out in white puffs, and frost began forming on the ancient walls. The shadow pool rose from the ground, taking shape, becoming solid. The Guardian stood before me, exactly as Dr. Wells had described, 9 feet tall, carved from living stone, with amber eyes that held the weight of centuries. When it moved, I heard the sound of boulders grinding together, the whisper of wind through mountain peaks. It raised one massive hand, and I felt its voice inside my mind, not words, but images and emotions that told a story older than human memory. I saw the ancient people building their homes in the cliff faces, raising children in rooms carved from solid rock. I saw them leaving when the rains stopped and the crops failed, taking what they could carry, but leaving behind the sacred things, the objects that connected them to their ancestors. I saw the first Guardian emerging from the stone, born from the prayers of desperate people who needed to know their heritage would be protected. I watched it stand vigil for 700 years, waiting patiently as the world changed around it, and I felt its growing anger as thieves came in increasing numbers, taking sacred objects to sell to collectors who would never understand their true value. The Guardian showed me visions of other sites, other ruins where similar guardians stood. Watch, it was part of a network, a system of protection that had been in place since the ancient people first asked the earth itself to defend what they couldn't take with them. But the message was clear. The killing would stop when the stealing stopped. Respect the sacred places, and the Guardian would remain hidden. Continue to defile them, and more. Thieves would join Cain and Morris and Garrett in their stone tombs. When the visions ended, I found myself on my knees in the moonlight, tears streaming down my face. The Guardian was gone, but I could feel it watching from the shadows, waiting to see what I would do with the knowledge it had shared. I understood now why my grandmother had always spoken of the old places with such reverence. They weren't just archaeological sites or tourist attractions. They were still homes, still protected, still sacred. And I was their guardian now too. The final confrontation came 2 weeks later, when the largest theft operation in Mesa Verde's history tried to strip Cliff Palace of its most precious artifacts. James Elliott wasn't just another black market dealer. He was the curator of a private museum in Houston, a man with academic credentials and institutional backing. He arrived at Mesa Verde with a team of graduate students and official permits that Crawford had approved without consulting the archaeological staff. Elliott's plan was brilliant in its audacity. He would conduct a legitimate research expedition while secretly removing the most valuable artifacts. His fake documentation would provide cover, and his academic reputation would deflect suspicion. By the time anyone realized what had happened, priceless ceremonial objects would be locked away in his private collection. Dr. Wells came to me on July 2nd with her concerns about Elliott's operation. She'd been monitoring the geological changes around the sites since Cain's death, and her instruments were detecting massive disturbances beneath Cliff Palace. "The stone is moving," she told me, showing me readouts that looked like seismograph recordings. Not earthquakes, something else. "It's like the entire cliff face is ... awakening." I knew what that meant. The Guardian was preparing for war. That evening, I tried to warn Elliott away from his planned midnight excavation. I found him in his hotel room, surrounded by maps and photographs of Cliff Palace's interior chambers. "Mr. Elliott," I said, "I need to tell you something about Mesa Verde, about the things that protect these places." Elliott was a thin man in his 50s, with a kind of arrogance that comes from years of academic success. He looked at me like I was a backwoods local who didn't understand the importance of serious research. "Ranger Whitehorse," he said condescendingly, "I appreciate your concern, but I have all the necessary permits. My work here is completely legitimate." I told him about the deaths, about the Guardian, about what happened to thieves who tried to steal from sacred sites. Elliott listened with growing amusement, occasionally chuckling at what he considered primitive superstition. "Fascinating folklore," he said when I finished. "I'll be sure to include it in my paper on indigenous belief systems. But I'm a scientist, not a storyteller. I deal in facts, not fairy tales." "The facts are that 3 people are dead," I said. "The fact is that something in these ruins doesn't want to be disturbed." Elliott waved me away. "The only thing disturbing these ruins is ignorance and lack of proper academic oversight. After tomorrow night, some of Mesa Verde's most important artifacts will finally receive the study and preservation they deserve." I left his room knowing I'd failed to save him. But I also knew I couldn't let him succeed in his theft. Too much was at stake, not just the artifacts, but the trust between the Guardian and the people who genuinely wanted to protect these places. At 11 p.m., I positioned myself in the rocks above Cliff Palace with binoculars and a radio. Dr. Wells joined me, along with her geological monitoring equipment. If Elliott was going to try something, we'd be ready to stop him. At midnight, Elliott and 3 graduate students approached the ruins with professional excavation equipment and specialized lighting. They moved efficiently through the main structure, heading directly for the painted wall panels that were among Mesa Verde's most precious treasures. "They know exactly what they're looking for," Dr. Wells whispered. "This isn't exploration, it's robbery." Through my binoculars, I watched Elliott direct his students to begin carefully removing a section of painted plaster that depicted ancient ceremonies. The work was skilled and methodical, designed to take the artifact without damaging it. That's when the ground began to shake. It started as a low rumble, like distant thunder or heavy machinery, but there was no storm, and we were miles from any construction. The sound was coming from beneath us, from deep within the cliff face itself. Elliot's team felt it too. They paused in their work, looking around nervously as dust began falling from the ancient ceiling, but Elliot urged them to continue, convinced that a little seismic activity wouldn't stop his grand theft. Dr. Wells' instruments were going crazy. "The entire cliff is moving," she said, her voice tight with fear. "It's like something massive is rising from inside the rock." The temperature plummeted. Our breath turned visible, and frost began forming on the metal equipment. The moonlight seemed too dim, as if the very air was growing thick and cold. Then the shadows began gathering. They poured from every crack and crevice in the cliff face, flowing together like living darkness. The pool of shadow grew larger and denser, taking shape in the center of Cliff Palace's main plaza. The Guardian emerged from stone and darkness, larger than before, more terrible in its ancient fury. Its amber eyes blazed with the fire of stars, and its massive hands clenched into fists that could crush boulders. Elliot's students screamed and ran, dropping their equipment as they fled into the night. But Elliot himself stood frozen, his face white with shock as he stared at something that shouldn't exist. The Guardian moved toward him with slow, inexorable steps. Each footfall left deep impressions in solid stone, as if the ancient rock was no more substantial than wet clay. When it spoke, its voice was the sound of avalanches and earthquakes. Words formed from the grinding of tectonic plates. But I heard it clearly, as if it spoke directly into my mind. "Thieves will... face... judgment." Elliot tried to run then, but the floor beneath his feet had turned soft and treacherous. He sank to his ankles in what had been solid sandstone moments before, trapped like an insect in amber. "Please," he begged, all his academic arrogance gone. "I was just... I was trying to preserve them. For science, for education." The Guardian reached down and placed one massive hand on Elliot's chest. Stone began flowing round the curator's body, creeping up his legs and torso like rising water. But this wasn't quick like the others had been. The Guardian was taking its time, letting Elliot understand exactly what was happening to him. "The sacred... belongs to the sacred," the Guardian rumbled, "not to... thieves... and collectors." I couldn't watch anymore. I stood up from my hiding place and called out to the ancient protector. "He understands now," I said in the clearest voice I could manage. "He knows he was wrong. Isn't that enough?" The Guardian turned those terrible, amber eyes toward me, and I felt the weight of its attention like a physical force. For a moment, I thought it might decide I was another thief to be punished. Then, it nodded slowly. The stone stopped flowing around Elliot's body, leaving him trapped up to his chest, but still alive. The painted wall panel he'd been trying to steal rose from the ground on a pillar of flowing rock, positioning itself back in its original place. "Guard." "Well," the Guardian said to me. Then it sank back into the shadows, becoming one with the stone that had birthed it. Elliot survived, though he spent the rest of his life partially embedded in the wall of Cliff Palace. A living warning to anyone who might think about stealing. From the sacred places, the Park Service built a protective barrier around him and classified the whole incident as a geological hazard. But Dr. Wells and I knew the truth. We'd witnessed something that science couldn't explain but couldn't deny. A Guardian older than civilization, protecting treasures more valuable than money could measure. That was 40 years ago. I'm retired now, but I still live near Mesa Verde, still walk the ancient trails when my old bones allow it. The Guardian and I have an understanding. I protect what I can through laws and regulations, and it protects what I can't through older, more permanent methods. The artifact theft stopped after Elliot's accident. Word spread through the black market that Mesa Verde was too dangerous to touch, that some kind of supernatural protection watched over the ruins. Professional thieves moved on to easier targets, leaving our sacred places in peace. Dr. Wells never finished her geological study, but she became something more important, a bridge between scientific understanding and ancient wisdom. She's written papers on anomalous rock formations that dance around the truth without quite revealing it. Work that's influenced a new generation of researchers to approach archaeological sites with proper respect. Elliot still lives in Cliff Palace, now 73 years old and permanently part of the wall he tried to rob. The Park Service provides him with food and medical care, and tourists are told he's part of an experimental preservation technique. Sometimes I visit him, and we talk about the weight of protecting things that can't protect themselves. I understand now, he told me last week, his voice echoing strangely from his stone prison. They're not just artifacts. They're pieces of souls, fragments of a people's identity. Taking them would have been murder. The Guardian shows itself occasionally, always when someone new tries to disturb the sacred sites. Word has spread among the tribal communities that the old protections are still active, that the ancient people kept their promise to watch over what they couldn't take with them. My own grandson, Joseph, works as a ranger now. He's studying archaeology at Fort Lewis College, learning to read the stones and understand the stories they tell. I've told him about the Guardian, about the importance of treating these places with respect rather than just academic curiosity. Will I see it? He asked me recently. I hope not, I told him. If you see the Guardian, it means someone is doing something that threatens the sacred places. It means someone has forgotten that some things are more important than money, or fame, or even knowledge. Sometimes, late at night when the moon is dark and the wind whispers through the ancient walls, I walk the old trails and feel the Guardian's presence. It's still there, still watching, still protecting the heritage of a people who trusted the very stones to remember them. The tourists come and go, marveling at the engineering and artistry of the cliff dwellings. Most leave with photographs and souvenirs from the gift shop, content to have glimpsed a vanished civilization. They never know how close they are to something that predates their understanding of what's possible. But some visitors are different. They stand quietly in the ruins, listening to stories older than written history. They ask respectful questions and leave offerings of water or cornmeal, following traditions they may not fully understand but somehow recognize as important. Those visitors sometimes catch glimpses of amber light in dark alcoves, or hear the distant sound of stone moving. Deep within the cliff faces, they leave Mesa Verde changed, carrying with them the knowledge that some places are still protected by powers older than human law. The Guardian taught me that protection comes in many forms. Laws and fences and security cameras are important, but they're not enough. Real protection comes from understanding that some things are sacred, that some treasures are worth more than money, and that some promises last longer than the people who make them. Mesa Verde is safe now, guarded by rangers who carry badges and an ancient spirit that carries the dreams of a vanished people. The stolen artifacts have been returned to their proper places. The thieves have learned permanent lessons about respect, and the sacred sites rest peacefully under the Colorado sky. But the Guardian is still there, waiting in the stone, ready to rise if anyone forgets that some places are protected by more than park rangers. My name is Edward Whitehorse, and I've spent my life learning that the old stories are true. The ancient people never really left their homes. They're still here, still watching, still protecting what matters most, and they always will be.